Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of professional advisors working lunches with today's partner, Schroders. I'm Andrew O'Kelly with Professional Advisor, and I'll be your host for today. Before we start today's session, I'm just going to briefly run through some housekeeping notes. Your microphones are off at the moment and your cameras as well. We'd appreciate it if you could keep it that way. It'll ensure that there's no background noise so the speakers can be heard more clearly. For those of you who either have a nickname or simply your Christian name against your screen icon, please look out for the chat function where you'll probably receive a message from my colleague Joe just to establish who you are. It's simply so that we can ensure that you receive your CPD certificate after the event, and we don't want you missing out on that. Today's session will be broken down into a few sort of sessions. It'll be slightly different. So as well as the usual Q&A session at the end, do please feel free to ask questions of our speakers throughout the session. And you can post those questions using the chat function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. So whether it's during a discussion session or at the end, we'll endeavour to address your questions in the time that we have. I should also inform you that this session is being recorded, and they will send you a link to the recording by tomorrow. So do please feel free to share that with your colleagues. And as usual, today's working lunch will qualify for 1 hour of CPD. We'll be sending you your proof of attendance along with the link to the recording of the session. Now, just before we kick off, can I just make one final plea for everybody? If you're not a speaker on the session, would you please be kind enough to turn your microphone off? I can see one or two, I can hear one or two in the background. That really does help the presentation. I did a quick Google Trends search this morning, and since the beginning of the first lockdown on the 23rd of March last year, searches for the term filing for divorce have increased by a staggering 80%. Now, if a reasonable percentage of those searches actually do end in divorce, it leaves a significant number of partners with a lump sum in cash with potentially little or no knowledge of financial prudence. Well, to look into the issue, excuse me, I'm confused with a screen here. We're joined by Schroders Director of Intermediary Solutions, Gillian Hepburn, and two financial advisors, Unique Financial Planning's Managing Director, Philip Martin, and an advisor who now specialises in advice for divorcees, Director of TRPP Wealth Management, Mike Caffyn. So to start today's discussion, let me pass you over to Schroders' Gillian Hepburn. Afternoon, Gillian.
Afternoon, Andrew. And I'm delighted to be joining everybody on the session today. I just thought we'd start by looking at the key objectives of the session. And we're going to start by looking at some of the opportunities for building and developing your business. And where does divorce play in this? Some of the practical application and the potential challenges of working with divorcees. And then lastly, what are some of the specific considerations for advising women typically, although obviously we will cover divorced partners, both male and female, in the session today. So hopefully lots to discuss. And I think what we're doing at the moment is having a quick poll as well in terms of where everybody is in terms of this journey and looking at the people who are divorcing. Andrew, maybe you can tell me when that's finished, and we can move on. So it's really interesting. Obviously, the stats have just come through, and many businesses don't offer a specialist service for clients going through divorce. So hopefully, by the end of the session, we might whet the appetite, so to speak, in terms of thinking about this and potential opportunities in the business. If we look at the first slide, I'm just going to start by just talking about a few things before we get the other speakers involved. At Schroders here, we've talked a lot about wealth transfer over the last couple of years, and we've looked at many numbers, and some of those might be familiar to you. So 5.5 trillion moving from one generation to the next over the next 30 years, and the average estate being £406,000 or just above that. But interestingly, what we've often talked about in this reference is a wall of money moving from one generation to the next. But last year, interestingly, we started to talk about how much of this money actually moves to women first. And maybe that's something that we've all forgotten about. There's often a focus on movement to the next generation, but forgetting that actually generation passing on wealth now often moves to women. But also there are many people sadly getting divorced, and again that's another way of wealth transfer into the hands of women. So we thought today that we would explore the divorce area in a bit more detail, and I'm really delighted to be joined by Mike and Philip to discuss this. As practitioners within their own advisor businesses, what does this look like, and where are they on the journey? If you move on to the next slide, I think what's also interesting, and again, one of the reasons that we started to explore this is every year Schroders undertake an advisor survey, and some of you might have been kind enough to take part in that for us. But last year we asked about, as we moved into 2021, what were the key areas of concern for financial advisors? And interestingly, and probably no big surprise, the top two were regulation and PI cover. But for me, this question of finding new clients snuck in at number 3 and was a relatively new one. And we thought long and hard about this and thought, well, actually, maybe some of the new clients are already within the existing client bank in terms of wealth transfer opportunities. But clearly, there may also be an opportunity here to think about developing a focused advice proposition for those getting divorced. So again, an opportunity for us at Schroders to think about how we can help advisors constantly think about building their business and sometimes taking it in slightly different directions. If we move on to the next slide, I just thought before we introduce the guests and start our discussion, we just look at some of the numbers, because what is the potential size of the divorce market, if I could call it that? Well, very sadly, 42% of marriages end in divorce. And interestingly, the average age at divorce is on the rise. Now, that might be, as many of us have discussed, it might mean that actually the wealth has increased as well for people that are going through divorce. Andrew, as you said yourself, the number of divorce inquiries is increasing. And interestingly, some interesting statistics over the last year between the first lockdown, that there was a 42% increase in divorce inquiries, and in some weeks over the last year, if you looked at week on week, the divorce inquiries were up 75% on the previous year. It might be interesting to explore whether these have actually translated into reality. But interestingly, 1 in 3 women aged between 55 and 70 have experienced a divorce, with a significant impact for their pension income. 2 in 5 are heavily dependent on their partner. Now, what was interesting for me when I started to speak to Mike about this whole area of divorce is that it's actually not just simply about potentially pension sharing orders. And I think that's something that we want to explore as well in the session. So I think it's a good starting point, Mike. As an expert in this field, I'd really like to start by asking, how did you actually start on this journey, and how did you get into divorce, if I could call it
into
that?
Divorce, yes.
Into divorce, sorry.
Thanks, Gillian, and thanks for having me. A bit of background about me: I'm a director of TRPP Wealth Management in Romsey in Hampshire. I started off looking at divorce in the early 2000s when I worked in-house for a firm of lawyers in Bournemouth, and they had a very big family law team, and it was really interesting work initially, as far as getting to understand the process of divorce and what was involved in helping people through a dreadful time of their life. I left Schroders in 2005 and joined my current firm. And I thought I was well placed to try and market myself around other law firms around the UK. So I basically started, we've all been trying to develop professional connections for years. I felt I was pretty well placed to do that on the basis that I had 3 years working in-house for one. So I knew the way that they wanted people to act with their clients. And lawyers being lawyers, they're not interested in fees in the same way that accountants are. It's just very much making sure, firstly, that the client's looked after, and also that the advice that they're giving is correct. The sort of the thought of PI claims against the law firm is a big driver in them wanting help. So in 2008, Resolution are the firm who regulate or who train the family lawyers, and they were launching a thing called collaborative family law, where you agree not to go to court, and they wanted to have financial advisors involved in that, as well as family therapists. But from our point of view, they launched an accreditation process where you could sort of train to be an expert, in inverted commas, in the divorce process. So you could be brought into what we call a 5-way meeting. And that again, so once I passed that in 2008, I felt I was sort of quite well set to sort of try and sort of build my business around divorcing couples. And that's pretty much all I do now. I think we've had referrals from over 30 law firms around the UK. And what we often find is we'll get a referral from someone we've never heard of, because there's always two sides to the matter, and we might know the chap's solicitor, and someone from a completely different in the country might be acting for his soon-to-be ex-wife. So we end up getting, you know, a lot of work referred. As you said, Gillian, the ages we tend to deal with, I think this is partly because the younger people getting divorced haven't got the money, but we're normally 50s, 60s, even 70s sometimes. The oldest chap I had was 85 when he got divorced, which was a bit depressing, I must admit. But because they are, you know, of an age, similar age to me probably as well, there's quite high sums involved. And by the time we get to see them, they're normally pretty financially and mentally scarred by what they've had over the last couple of years. But we've had to adapt the way that we work, both during the divorce. I mean, one of the main things we try to do is to get involved early on. In the early days, we were presented with pension sharing orders or financial settlements of some sort that we couldn't understand how they got to it. So we wanted to try and get involved much earlier. And that means we're involved in the mediations, in the negotiations, but we've had to adapt the way that we work, both during the divorce and also when we're dealing with one or both parties afterwards, just to make sure people benefit from the advice that we can give in the best way.
I think, can I just ask about the accreditation? I'm going to let Phillips, I can see itching to ask questions here. But in terms of the accreditation, did that make a big difference to the business, Mike, in terms of managing these couples?
It gave me credibility. I think it's all about relationships with, as everyone on the screen knows, it's all about relationships. But if you can show that you've done something it's not just another exam that financial advisors do, it is something, and there's almost no financial advice in it. It's much more about the process of the divorce. What comes first, and how the sort of the actual process works, if you like. And then it's down to, once you've got that, it's just trying to chip away. And someone says that knowledge is king sometimes, didn't they? And I think that's true. That's if you can learn things about stuff that the lawyers need to know. I mean, a couple of examples at the moment, there's a judgment called McLeod, which people will probably be aware of, about public service schemes. And that does have an effect on post or previous and current advice being given to pension clients. There's nothing in it for us. But if you can sort of talk, that's a way in to talk to the lawyer through knowing about that. And the people may be aware of the thing called the PAG report, which was done a couple of years ago, which was the Pension Advisory Group. So there's lots of areas where you can chip away. But the accreditation, it doesn't get you any business, but it gives you credibility to add to everything else that you're doing.
Gillian, do you mind if I come in?
No, on you go. Yeah, so, absolutely. On you go.
So I mean, it's intriguing to me, Mike. I mean, in our own practice, we've got over 30 advisors in our practice across a number of different locations. And we would have pockets of this specialism, but we wouldn't market it as something that we had a particular strength in. Our unique wealth arm, for example, would have expertise and would be dealing with this fairly regularly. So I'm intrigued about two aspects of it, really. One is, how have you built those relationships with the professional introducers that start to give you those introductions in the first place, given that many of them will already have relationships in place? And secondly, given that you've decided to specialise specifically in divorce, those relationships must throw up other financial planning opportunities that come out of a family law practice. Are you quite focused that you don't want to deal with other situations, or would you tend to deal with them as well just by virtue of the relationship?
We can get anything. We'll do anything we can get ultimately. But I mean, as far as the way of developing the things, there's if you look into this properly, there's each sort of group of family lawyers around the UK, if they're into this thing called collaborative law, have to meet 3 or 4 times a year in what they call pods. So each pod will normally be a group of family lawyers, a couple sometimes of accountants who get involved in it, family therapists and financial advisors. And trying to get in front of a pod is a good way of doing it, because I mean, we're a member of, a colleague of mine's also accredited as well in the firm. So we're members of 4 different pods around the area. And I went to one yesterday where there were 15 lawyers and me. And that's fantastic as far as a marketing opportunity. But it's not everything we do, and quite often we end up talking to their children or their parents. They become long-term clients. I mean, they often, if we end up doing a pension share, then you start off with something. It's almost probably focused advice in a way, although you do tend to, you're looking to provide overall advice, but they're such at a time of their life where they just want to get this last bit done. But then they're long-term clients of the firm, and there's, I think I was trying to work out how many clients we've got through divorcing people. I think it's about 130 over the last sort of 10 years or so. We've been building up, but it may be more than that. But we've got sort of 14 pension sharing models on the go at the moment. So it's just mushroom, and you can't cope with anything else sometimes. So we've got 3 advisors in the firm. So anything else that's not divorce related will tend to sort of be done by somebody else these days, and I'll just do the divorce work just because there's no time to do more.
14 years, presumably you must be just on the cusp of doing your second time divorcee, I would have thought.
I haven't done one yet. No, that's true.
It's not very cheery.
Once bitten.
I'm intrigued by the age profile as well, actually. I mean, I know, Gillian, you've done work on this. I think you call that cohort silver splitters, don't you?
Yeah, the silver separators.
Silver separators.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's intriguing that there's a full gamut of ages that you're being exposed to as well.
Yeah.
Of itself, is that making the advice more complex? Because I guess this isn't just about getting assets into the hands of the divorced person. It may actually be thinking about cascading them down through generations at the same time.
It's interesting because, I mean, quite often we'll have a pension sharing order for someone in their 70s or 60s, and the pension is coming from a pension in payment, and therefore it still comes as cash to another pension, but almost entirely the choice is then drawdown or annuity, and that's part of the process which it gets more difficult is trying to persuade people not to look at the next generation. They'll often have a pension sharing report done by an actuary that will say that Mrs. Smith needs 63% of Mr. Smith's Barclays Bank pension to create equality of income. And the actuary will have assumed that she'll buy an RPI-linked annuity typically. I mean, I'm sure no one here often sells, index-linked, RPI-linked annuities, but the actuarial profession, I think rightly, would say Mr. Smith is going to keep a risk-free, guaranteed, index-linked pension. Why shouldn't she have the same? So when we end up talking to them and going through the options, there might be £500,000 coming out from his pension fund. And then we say, okay, well, you're assumed to be getting a £15,000 a year pension from this. That's what you're supposed to get. You haven't got to. You can do, draw down or buy a different type of annuity. And typically when people start talking about death benefits on drawdown, that's when clients' eyes light up. But then you go through a risk questionnaire and they're risk level 1. So it's very much, you have to try and say, okay, look, this is your money. You might want to, I mean, this is on pensions particularly, you might want to cascade it down the next generation, but you could run out. And that's not what you want. So talk to your sons and daughters about, you'll get the house, but this is my money. It may be, you might end up with a 3% rather than RPI, or a level annuity, however you want to do it, or partially. We did one last week where we bought an annuity for enough of what she actually needs for her basic income, and kept the rest in a SIP to provide the play funding or the play money.
Yeah.
From that on.
Okay, and you mentioned when you were going through that with the pods, the other people that can be brought in, the other areas of expertise to be brought in to smooth the process through, particularly around mediation and therapy. How do you find, who's controlling that relationship and bringing these people in? Are the lawyers happy to just refer that client over and then you're controlling all of these third parties and whether they're required or not? Or is the lawyer looking to control the relationship and take those decisions? Because that feels like a very interesting way of augmenting your proposition.
Yes, and I mean, what tends to happen is we've got the relationship with the mediator. So the mediator will send me a bundle of stuff saying, can you come and sit in on the mediation with the people next week? But in the meantime, can you prepare the cash flow or whatever it's going to be? Or it's kind of stress testing that if they end up agreeing this, what does that actually mean for people? And I think that's kind of where it comes in with the ladies, and that's not sexist at all. But there's always one party in the two who's way behind the other in terms of understanding and knowledge and experience. I mean, we always call it sort of pink jobs and blue jobs in our house as far as who does what, and that tends to be often the case. So in a mediation, the mediator, although they're often a lawyer, they can't give advice. So often, the chap will turn up with three laptops and a spreadsheet sort of coming out his ears, and his poor wife hasn't got a clue about what's going on. So the mediator is keen to bring me in to sit in the mediation, to firstly sort of dampen him down sometimes about what he wants to get. And more importantly, I think, is bring everybody's understanding up to a level where they can actually make sort of proper decisions on something in that sort of fairly intense situation. But it's normally controlled by the lawyer. We take it on the divorce thing one step further with another group I'm a member of called the Hampshire Family Legal Solutions, HFLS, where we've actually got a group of lawyers and a couple of family therapists as well as the financial advisors. And we effectively offer like a morning's intake meeting where you're seen by a family therapist, a financial advisor and your lawyer, to sort of try and tease out everything that's going to be coming out. Because what you don't want to happen, I mean, lawyers, bless them, some of them are very good at soft skills, but they can be confrontational at times. And having a family therapist in the room has proven to be invaluable for so many cases where we've actually diffused stuff that might derail the whole process. I think with the financial advisor in the room, it can create momentum that, if they don't understand what they're getting, normally it would be sort of close the meeting down, get a pension report and come back. But if we're there and we can say, actually, well, no, if you get that, you'll end up with roughly this, which will give you roughly that. Is that enough to live off? And if the answer is yes, then move on and try and get out of the situation best you can.
Yeah, understood. Gillian, back over to you.
Well, I'm keen to ask a question on vulnerable clients, because I think that's one thing I hadn't really thought of, Mike, until you and I started talking about this, about how one of the parties is often almost a temporary vulnerable client, and what challenges that might give.
We treat them both as potentially vulnerable from the start until they prove otherwise. So it's kind of, often they aren't vulnerable at all, but they're emotionally they're a bit vulnerable. Financially, they probably are vulnerable, and it depends. Sometimes, if you've got £5 million to divide between the two, then it's a nice situation. But often you're having to say, okay, well, you should have more of the pension, but you can't because you need to have the house because the 3 kids are still at home. So that's where the vulnerability comes in, as far as you might want to stay in the house, but if you do that, you're going to end up with nothing from his pension. So what happens in 10 years time when you retire? And I think that's where I think we have to treat them as emotionally vulnerable, certainly until right the way through the process, and until it's obvious that they're not.
Sure. And we also talked about how this isn't just necessarily about working on the pension, because I think an awful lot of people, don't they, assume that this whole situation is just about pension. Once that's sorted, then and that's everything. But I think you certainly gave me an insight into how it's actually broader than that, in terms of the work that you do.
Yeah, because pensions are often the biggest asset of the family, and therefore that's often the focus. But there's other ways where we can get brought in on the basis that they really want to get what they call a clean break these days. So if they can avoid a maintenance or periodical payments being made to the ex-spouse, and there's cash available in investments or however it's going to be, then they'd much rather sort of give the wife a lump of money for her to spend until the pension share comes in, rather than actually having a money. So, and that we can add value as an industry on that, because historically the lawyers use something called Duxbury, and again, this is something, knowledge is really useful to understand how they work. They use a system called Duxbury that has such ridiculous assumptions as far as returns. It's like sort of going back to the PIA days where it's 15% returns or that kind of thing. So it's so we need to dampen down, and cash flow planning can be really good, because the Duxbury might say that Mrs. needs £100,000 to provide her with £10,000 for life, whereas if we did it properly on a cash flow forecast, you might need £280,000. So it just gives you more ammunition for the lawyer to sort of to get the better settlements on that. But then it's then into sort of general financial planning, investment planning, and everything else.
Sure. Yeah. Philip, where are your or where is your business in terms of this kind of work, and do you see it as an opportunity? And I hate to always use that word opportunity, but clearly, there is a demand and a requirement for people to have financial advice at this point in their lives if they're divorcing. Where does it fit into your business in the moment?
So I wouldn't shy away or be embarrassed about describing it as an opportunity. I think if good financial advisors spot a place that they can add, demonstrable value and help and support people who have got money and make informed decisions, why on earth wouldn't you be looking at it? So I think, our own business is going through something of an evolution from being quite a generalist business advising in the mass market to one that has pockets of expertise. And I've alluded to that earlier on. We've set up a wealth division based out in Surrey. They would have pockets of expertise here and would deal with clients in these kinds of situations, and would have done over 15, 20 years. But it wouldn't be something that we would have broadly based as a centralized proposition and market it in that way. But I find it very, very interesting, and I think we should be having a far, far deeper look at it. We do already have some good relationships with referring lawyers, probably more with accountants actually, than we would with lawyers, and I think there'd be a nice spin-off from just widening those relationships too. So all in all, it feels like something that will be high up our agenda in the next 12 to 18 months, I think.
Sure. It's back to that, is it an opportunity for finding new clients and taking the business in different directions and providing a broader range of services? Obviously, Mike entirely focuses on it, but clearly for your business, there's got to be, if I'm allowed to call them now, opportunities as well.
Yeah.
I'm keen to also explore, I know we've talked, all of us, about how this is not just a female challenge, and that obviously men and women are divorcing, but at Schroders, as you know, earlier in the year we talked about the impact of financial services on women, and we did get some information, and Andrew, I'm not sure if you can share the slide that we put together that just gives us some of the research into how women feel about financial services. So this was a piece of work that we looked at when we were specifically looking at wealth transfer across to widows. But I think the challenges maybe are or should be, I would imagine, quite similar, that many advisors are starting to look at working with women as an opportunity for clear, for focused advice. Actually, I read something recently that 60% of the wealth in the UK will be in the hands of women by 2025. And some of the research says that they are unpracticed in financial decision making. Although I find that odd, given many manage the household finances quite effectively, but they're very focused on life goals and concerned about health and longevity. The one about risk was interesting. Apparently women are more averse to risk. I think that might just be more risk aware, but that's something that we can always debate. But clearly life events are a kind of key drivers for seeking advice, divorce being one of them. But they're also more likely to seek an advisor where there's a kind of personal fit and they want help with cash management. Maybe that's just a symptom of being allegedly risk averse rather than risk aware. But they're happy to pay for advice that really fits their needs. I was just keen to explore that because Mike, obviously you work a lot with women. And I think you described it to me at one point as that often, sadly, many of these women, when they do have a large sum of money as a result of a divorce, are a little bit like rabbit in the headlights. And so do you find that these are some of the challenges when you're working with women specifically?
Yeah, I think initially when we sit down with them following the divorce, we know what's going to be happening. And we go through the normal risk assessments, it can be difficult because they'll be asking it from a position, answering it from a position of, I've got this money, I don't want to lose it. And they've never been responsible in the family situation for investing the money. So you'll often come, there'll be a 50-something-year-old person who's not going to be touching the money for 10 years, who says, I want risk level 1. And that's, you can't do anything but cash. But having the conversation about, are you answering the questions from because you are that risk averse, or just you haven't been exposed to having to ask that sort of question before. But I'm not sure it's not just obviously in divorce. I saw a lady yesterday who her investments had gone up really well over the last 18 months, but we hadn't done a risk questionnaire for a couple of years. So I went through the risk questionnaire again. And she came, she was probably about a 5 on the portfolio we've been running for her, but she was a 3 on the risk assessment. And I sort of said, well, we probably really should sort of drop you down. She said, yeah, but that's going to hurt my return. I don't want to do that. So it's kind of, she was answering it from a different perspective almost, from if I have some more money, what I want to do with it. And it's just almost taking that. But I think that the way we need to do it with ladies is firstly try and do it face to face wherever possible these days, because you can go through it more slowly and actually sort of tease out what's actually going to be important to them, what their life challenges are going to be, what the kids' plans are, but it's just taking more time and not just relying on a normal risk assessment. It's much more getting to know them as people. And I think that slide there says, it's very true that we get more testimonials from family thing in the firm than anybody else, as far as they're much more appreciative of the work that we do for them, and very happy to pay, unless they're teachers who tend to be more sort of fee averse, don't they? But most people sort of tend to be very happy to pay the fees that we're wanting to pay to charge them.
Yeah.
My just one question I've got just coming out of that about risk appetite and strategies is that it occurs to me that on splitting assets on divorce, it could very well be that the amount that the divorced person is receiving is going to be wholly inadequate for their needs, irrespective of what their risk appetite might say. So do you sometimes find a disconnect that the assets that they're left with mean that they have to take more risk than the way that you have gauged their risk would suggest that they wish to?
That's a very real thing, isn't it? For many planning things, is that you say you want to get to the stage where you can do this. To do that, you'd have to get X performance, which means Y risk profile, but you're nowhere near that. Yeah. So you're leaving yourself very exposed as a firm, aren't we? If we say we've got to try and shoot the lights out to get that, knowing how volatile markets could be, and you might end up being even further away. So I think that we need to sort of, I think during the divorce process, they're always asked to complete sort of expenditure thing, and there's normally 3 massages a week and everything else on there when you're negotiating. But in reality, you can talk to them about actually, what their real expenditure should be, and is there anything else that they could do to make it. I hate giving people more risk than they're comfortable with. It just doesn't sit very well with a long-term relationship. And it's nice when you see people and money's gone up in line with what they're expecting it to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah.
Yeah, and what about the actual investments? I'm just keen. One of the things we're told often is that women, for example, are more concerned or more interested in sustainable investing. Is that something that you see coming through at all? And either of
yeah, and I think that's them. They often will actually volunteer that. So you sometimes when you're sort of showing the options or talking about the options, then sustainable or ethical will come into the conversation. It's often something that the ladies particularly will say that I really want to do this. I don't want to have tobacco, whatever it's going to be. So they're much more, and then you often see how well the sustainable portfolios do. And it's kind of, it's a good story anyway, isn't it? But I think certainly there are more ladies than gents will request ethical investments in our experience.
Yeah, interesting. Philip, do you find that in your own business as well?
Yes, although I mean, you can end up with a bit of a skewed statistic there, because it rather depends who's sitting in front of you and you're having the conversation with, and
sure.
until the advent of couples being at the end of the same Zoom call, you would typically have had one. So I'm not really sure that we would draw any inference from it at the moment. Yeah. There's no question the whole subject has risen in interest as everybody's jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah, actually, you've raised a really interesting point there, Philip, in terms of Zoom calls. I mean, clearly we've been living in a very different environment in the last year. Mike, how has that impacted in terms of the way that working with couples that are going through what is a difficult time? How has that changed in any way? Obviously, you'll be doing a number of these meetings online, I would guess. And do you expect that to change as we come out of this, lockdown position?
Yeah, and I mean, we often have the mediations and the collaborative things. There's often 5 people on the screen, and breakout rooms can be very handy to sort of because there's normally, in a normal situation, you'll be in the lawyer's offices and they'll have 2 rooms separate from the main room we're in, just in case they need to take some time out, just either with or without the family consultant, just to go and get their head straight on it. But I think the majority of people are, but not they're putting on an act because they're in front of strangers or not, I don't know, but they're normally fairly okay to the stage. We wonder sometimes why they're getting divorced in the first place, because they seem to be getting on so well.
Reconciliation service then.
Well, yes, yeah. I just saw a question about the sort of the pods, about how to find the pods. If you go on to resolution.org, is the name of the website that is the training body for the family lawyers, and all around the country there'll be these collaborative law pods, but Resolution will have a list of them, and they'll always have a sort of what they call a pod liaison officer or a pod chairman. It'll just be one of the lawyers you might know locally. And most of them are very happy to get people involved. What they don't want is people who just see this as a sales opportunity to get new clients. What they do want is someone who wants to try and help the people involved, rather than just seeing it as a marketing opportunity. And the only thing I'd say is that if you do get to see the pods, we've had this quite a lot over the past, is that someone will be, and we're not exclusive at all. We want to get more and more people involved in this. Because we think that it does create an awful lot of goodwill from the lawyers to financial advisors as an industry, because we can help them an awful lot in stuff they're not very good at. But when often people will come to a pod meeting, in the following 2 months, they don't turn up again. And when you ask them, they say, well, I haven't had any business yet. And it can take a year or so to get anything, but the more you chip away and the more you're seen to be there, and the more offer them some training for their team, some CPD training on pensions or whatever it's going to be, just do anything you can just to break down the things, but on the basis of helping them with their advice rather than trying to get them to refer clients, I think would be my advice.
Great advice there. I'm keen that we can move into some questions, but just before that, it'd be interesting just to identify whether or not there's any kind of key. I know you've talked a lot and given us a lot of hints and tips in this session, but Mike, is there anything specific that you would say to anybody that's listening in today that's thinking about moving in this direction that they should think about?
I think firstly, it's a fantastic area to be involved in. I mean, from a pure financial point of view, there are some big numbers involved, both in pensions. There's also opportunities of protection and mortgage. If people are mortgage advisors, one or both will normally need a mortgage following it. So there's lots of potential. And again, if you are mortgage advisors, the courts and the lawyers often need someone to do affordability reports. It's not something that we do, but it's often something that we refer out to other people. But it's trying to understand the process of, when's the first appointment, the FDR, what's a pension, what's a P1, and all the stuff that the lawyer will expect you to know. And I think if you don't do the research first, you'll come across as a bit like the old style IFA they thought we all were. And that's, I think, we've fought long and hard as an industry to raise ourselves up in professionals' views.
Absolutely. Philip, what about yourself? Is there anything that struck you as a result of the session that we've had so far?
Well, I think the points that Mike's making about how to develop those relationships and prove the expertise is actually quite telling. That it's going to need quite a lot of planning and could well be a slow burn, and people's expectations are going to need to be managed, because it's clearly not just going to yield instantly in the way that some people might expect that it would. So, I mean, I take a lot from that, actually, but in some respects, that's no different from developing professional relationships across any number of different facets, is it?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Andrew, do we want to just move on and look at any questions that have come through?
I think so.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Let's just sum up with those key learning objectives, and I hope that we've addressed all of those as we have gone through. So, Gillian, Mike, and Philip, just quickly to say thank you very much for what I think, and I hope our audience will agree, has been a really insightful and informative session. And having run through that presentation now, let's just run our final poll and see if that's influenced anybody's thoughts or decisions going forward. So is divorce an area that you might consider offering specialist advice going forwards? Just let that run for a few seconds whilst everybody has their say. Well, you can't see the results just yet, but actually they're looking very interesting. Certainly interesting, given here we are. Here's the results. So 62% of you have said yes, whereas I think just over 50% of you at the outset didn't have a specialisation. So that's very interesting indeed, and thank you for taking part in that poll. So we do have 10 to 15 minutes available for Q&A. So do please participate by typing your questions. I'll just go through these, the obligatory notices. Do type your questions in the chat function, or if you prefer to remain anonymous, just select my name from the drop-down list next to where you type your question, and and I'll endeavour to put all your questions to our speakers. So just to get us going, Gillian, a quick question from me. It has been a really interesting session, but I was sort of just wondering why, as an asset manager, Schroders is covering an area such as this.
It's a good question, Andrew, and it relates way back as well to when we started talking about wealth transfer in general, probably over 2 years ago now. My role in the business is intermediary solutions, and for me that's not just about delivering investment solutions, but it's about helping financial advisors to think about their businesses and different angles, and how we can provide additional support. And I think we probably put a slide in here just about some of the support that we provide in general for wealth transfer, in terms of some of the guides that are available, and also some of the information on the website. So for me, it's just about that broader piece. If we genuinely are delivering investment solutions, then actually we also, I think, need to be looking at where we can provide other solutions in terms of more business-based solutions. So that's really why we're always keen to work with advisors across a broad spectrum of of problems, challenges, and solutions. If that helps. Yeah, so that's just the guide, and we're more than happy to make that guide available to anybody. And some of you might have spotted we have launched some new investment solutions. Today is not for covering those in any detail, but it's just there's some new model portfolios and multi-asset funds that might be of interest to your business. And again, that just relates to our whole solutions business, whether it be business solutions or investment solutions.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Gillian. And
okay.
Really interesting. So, and for anybody who wants to get in touch with the folks at Schroders, here are the details of just how you do that. And there'll be a recording of this, as I said. You'll be able to pick up that information later on. So let's get into back into the Q&A now. I've got a couple of questions that have come in here from Joe Carver. Where's the best place to gain the information to do this research?
Some of the life companies do quite good guides. I think Pru, or might be Zurich, used to do quite a good guide. I'd encourage people to look. It's a free access to this thing called the PAG report, the Pensions Advisory Group report, because that's fast becoming the Bible for family lawyers on divorce. And again, resolution will have bits on resolution you can look at. And there's lots of information on Google, but I think certainly the PAG report is something that would be a really good place to start to get a. It's not a guide on how it works. That's much more. You can Google the divorce process, and there'll be lots of things in there from family lawyers groups. But the PAG report is a really good one to have a look through.
Okay, well, one here I think. So from Kaz Stubbington, with resolution, I'm finding it's a bit chicken and the egg. Am I right in thinking you need to be working actively in the divorce process to complete their accreditation?
That is something that's true, Kaz, and it's something that I'm on the resolution committee as far as sort of with the accreditation committee, and it's something that we are very aware of. What I would say is that you don't need to have the accreditation to be active in the market. What they want you to do is to be working in the market to sort of and have CPD and live cases that you can refer to, because there's exams and also you have to sort of throw through some sort of pension reports and real cases that you've been going through. But it's the end rather than the start. So I think if people sort of want to get accredited so they can start doing it, that's almost the wrong way of doing it. I think almost, build the relationships. You don't need to do accreditation to be in the pod meetings. I mean, some pods may say they do, but there aren't that many IFAs around the country who are accredited, and we're really keen to double the number there are. So if the pod is not welcoming to people, then you're in the wrong pod, because it should be wanting people to try and specialise in this. But it is a bit, you do sort of need to have the work before you can get accreditation, but it's a specialist thing. So it's not an exam that you can tick off in the same way you can with AF3 or that sort of thing. It is something that people need to be doing before they can show that they're expert in.
And there's a few coming in now. Again, from Joe Carver, what type of marketing have you found beneficial to be known as a specialist in the area? Have you undertaken, dedicated marketing and targeted marketing of this kind?
No, I think it's just getting your face in front of as many people as you can, but doing it in a way that you're chipping away. I think that I mean, back in the day that we used to sort of send round sort of, if you thought, I'd say, if you wanted to have a look at the McLeod judgments, and there's lots of questions on that as far as how it's affecting people. We put together a sort of a more pragmatic view of it, and we've emailed it as a PDF round to probably 150 lawyers that we know, and that's marketing, but it's nothing to do with marketing us. It's just marketing our name, if you like. But I think the biggest thing is just, I mean, back in the day, we'd have taken them out for coffee, wouldn't we? That's more difficult these days, but
that seems a long time ago now.
It does, but it is all about relationships with them and knowing that you're a safe pair of hands for their vulnerable clients. Yeah.
Okay. I've got another question for Gillian.
Okay.
Again, it's been fascinating. Are Schroders doing any further work around this theme, Gillian?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're doing a bit more work in terms of widows, which we talked about in our last lunchtime session with you. So we're doing some focus groups actually with advisors and also with women throughout different generations, and the impact of becoming a widow and whether or not they changed advisors, because interestingly the statistics tell us that up to 70% of women who become widowed change the advisor within the first year of their partner passing away. So for us, that was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of wealth transfer. So we're trying to explore, why that happens, and also help advisors to think about the potential impact on their business as they potentially lose assets, maybe at the point when they're trying to maximise the valuation for an exit strategy. So yes, there's much more in pipeline this year, which hopefully we'll bring to another working lunch at some point in the future.
Well, we'll certainly look forward to that. And in the meantime, if anybody has questions about what we can see are remarkable opportunities to develop your business and grow your number of clients, then I'm quite sure that the good people at Schroders will be more than happy to take your call or respond to your emails. And as I said, we'll pass on those contact details later on. In the absence of any other questions, I think we'll close that the session now. But just before we sign off, let me just remind you of some dates for your diary during June. In 3 weeks' time, we'll be bringing you 2 consecutive days of working lunches hosted by the newly named Fintel Group. On Wednesday, the 16th of June, Simply Biz will discuss ways to manage the growth of an advisor business through reducing risk and cost, while at the same time enhancing your client solutions. And the following day, on the 17th, Fintel's bespoke consulting division, Signature, will take a look at the key elements driving your business in a post-COVID world. And they'll take a deep dive into aspects such as intergenerational wealth, ESG investments, assessing suitability and retirement income within your centralized investment proposition. And finally, our sort of flagship event for the first half of this year, on the 24th of June, we present the Professional Advisor Day of our Sustainable Investment Festival. That's a 4-day festival involving institutional, wealth management, and discretionary, as well as professional advisors. The PA Day is on the 24th of June. It's a full day's online conference. It'll be chaired by former BBC business editor Declan Curry, and it'll feature keynote presentations from Boring Money's Holly Mackay, Hortense Buoy from Morningstar, and Square Mile Research's Richard Roma Lee. And during the day, you can also watch presentations from Bailey Gifford, from BMO, Eden Tree, Lion Trust, Pictet, Rathbones, Schroders, who are a major sponsor of this event, and Schroders. So all in all, in June, that adds up to a total of 7 hours of CPD. We hope that some of that will prove interesting to you. So that's it for today's session. All that remains is for me to thank Gillian, Mike and Philip for a really first-class session. But as ever, let me reserve the bulk of our thanks to you, our readers, for your company this lunchtime. I trust you found this helpful and worthwhile. And if you did, then we'll look forward to seeing you again in June. Goodbye.